prior to going into Bulugh al-Maram, any questions on what we covered earlier? طيب. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So in hadith, according to the English translation, it is 58. According to the book that I'm using in Arabic, is hadith number 70. The reason why there's a difference in numbers, because in the translation, hadith that in the Arabic text, sometimes the hadith that underneath the same bab of different riwayat of the hadith, they just count it as one hadith in the English translation. Whereas in the Arabic, it will be numbered each one. So it's not like you're missing out in any hadith, just to clarify that. So the hadith is عن ثوبان رضي الله عنه قال بعث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم سرية فأمرهم أن يمسحوا على الأصائب يعني العمائم والتساخين يعني الخفاف رواه أحمد وأبو داود وصححه الحاكم. So this hadith mentions that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whenever he sent out a small group of soldiers, a convoy, on a military expedition, he commanded them to wipe over their turbans. Sa'ib is the ama'im, the turbans, were tasakhin, al-khifaf, meaning the socks. Now, this hadith serves as a foundation, the permissibility of wiping over the imama. Wiping over the imama. And it's not, for example, how you find some of us wear it sometimes, where it's just hanging down and ironed in the middle with a crease, the red and white one, or the sometimes other plain white and black. Rather, it's one that is tied around the head. The one that is tied around the head that may cause some form of hardship if it was to be removed. So as long the same conditions would apply in terms of wiping over the sock, that you'd have had to warn it upon at-tahara, purity. Also, it shows that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and also those who are in a position of authority, would send convoys in military expeditions whilst they were stationary, not travelers. Again, evidence of permissibility of wiping over the imama, the head turban, and also this would apply to women in hijab or khimar, in situations where it's difficult to remove it or to access wiping over their head in wudu. Again, wiping over the socks. It also shows that sometimes al-amru yufidu al-ibaha. Sometimes the command shows permissibility and not obligation. Because it's not an obligation to wipe over the socks, wipe over the imam, but it's what is preferred to be done. In terms of whatever the Prophet ﷺ gave us of concessions, the sunnah is to take the concessions. And that is more virtuous. If we look at this hadith alone by itself, then we would say there was no time period for how long you can wipe over your imama or your socks. Also, it shows that the imam, meaning not imam of a masjid, but imam of a country or a nation of the Muslims, that they will consult whomsoever they felt necessary to delegate them to do specific duties. You don't, not the forehead is never wiped over. The place where your hair starts is where you wipe. Wiping over the khimar, where your hair would start underneath the khimar, and you just wipe over, and you don't have to do it. You just wipe over. The next hadith, an Umar radiallahu anhu, mawqufan. Mawqufan means This doesn't go back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the one that's an Umar. This goes back to Umar saying this. وأن أنس رضي الله عنه مرفوعا. It says to Anas it's مرفوع. It goes back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. إذا توضأ أحدكم ولبس خفيه فليمسح عليهما وليصلي فيهما ولا يخلعهما إن شاء إلا من جنابة أخرجه الدارقطني والحاكم وصححه. The next hadith وعن أبي بكر رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه رخص للمسافر 3 أيام ولياليهن وللمقيم يوما وليلة إذا تطهر فلبس خفيه أن يمسح عليهما أخرجه الدارقطني وصححه ابن خزيمة. وعن أبي بن عمارة رضي الله عنه أنه قال يا رسول الله أمسح على الخفين؟ قال نعم. قال يوما؟ قال نعم. قال ويومين؟ قال نعم. قال و3 أيام؟ قال نعم وما شئت. أخرجه أبو داود وقال ليس بالقوي. أي حديث ليس يعني ممكن ضعيف. الحديث ليس بالقوي يعني ضعيف. Now within these ahadith they are giving an indication to the time period on how long a person can wipe over their socks. The first one mentioned when one of you performs wudu and then wears their socks, then let them wipe over their socks and pray wearing them, and do not take them off if they will, unless you fall into a state of janaba. A state of janaba, major impurity, you have to remove the socks and perform ghusl. The next hadith mentions the Prophet ﷺ gave the concession of the one who's traveling for 3 days and their nights, and the one who is stationary, resident, 1 day, 1 night, if they purify themselves and then they wear their socks, that they can wipe for those 2 periods of time. So for one who's traveling, 72 hours, the one who's not traveling, 24 hours. And we mentioned previously the time of wiping starts off from the first time you wipe over the sock. The next hadith that is authentic mentions the Prophet. He asked the Prophet about wiping over the sock. He said yes. He said a day. He said yes. He said 2 days. He said yes. He said 3 days. He said yes. And what you wish. But based on, we know the other hadith that we know that the restriction, the maximum time is 3 days. It wouldn't be whatever you wished beyond that. Also, this is evident that wiping over the socks is a concession. And from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ease upon his servants in acts of worship is the legislation of wiping over the socks and the imamah. As for the previous hadith that we mentioned, that's the hadith of Safwan ibn Assal that mentions the time period. Again, that makes it known that there is a restriction in time for how long you're allowed to wipe over the socks. Now, some may say, for example, if a person's in a situation when they are like sick and the likes, that they may be excused from observing the time period. However, the time is 3 days if you're traveling, and a day and a night if you are resident, of wiping over the sock. The next topic that is now mentioned is nawaqid al-wudu. Nawaqid al-wudu, that which breaks the wudu, the nullifiers of wudu. Now, of the things mentioned, nawaqid al-wudu, hiya mubtilat al-tahara. They are that which nullifies a person's tahara. وسميت نواقض لأن الطهارة كالشيء المبرم أو مبرم والمحكم. ويقال للنواقض أيضا موجبات الطهارة. He mentions the reason why they're called nawaqid, ay nullifiers, because tahara is something that is established and affirmed. And obviously it's something that's going to break that affirmation. ويقال للنواقض is also, they're also referred to as موجبات الطهارة, that which necessitates purification. لأنها تجب الطهارة منها لما اشترط أو تشترط فيه الطهارة أو لما تشترط أو تشترط فيه الطهارة كالصلاة. This is because they necessitate tahara, especially in that which is a condition of, such as the salah, the prayer. والنواقض ثلاثة أقسام. And they mentioned when it comes to the three types of that which nullifies the wudu is one, that which is ناقض بالإجماع, by consensus it breaks the wudu. ومنها ما هو مختلف فيه والراجح النقد. And you have those that are differed in, but the correct opinion is that it breaks the wudu. ومنها ما هو مختلف فيه والراجح عدم النقد. And you have that which is differed in, but what is more correct is that it does not break the wudu. So he mentions, and Anas ibn Malik رضي الله عنه قال كان أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على عهده ينتظرون العشاء حتى تخفق رؤوسهم ثم يصلون ولا يتوضؤون. أخرجه أبو داود وصححه دارقطني وأصله في مسلم. It mentioned in this hadith that the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam during his time were waiting for Salat al-Isha until their heads were dozing down, lowering down because they were dozing off. Then they would pray, they would stand up and pray and not perform wudu. And this is collected in both in Abu Dawood and authenticated by Daraqutni. And the asl of this hadith is in Sahih Muslim. It mentioned هذا الحديث, this hadith أصل في عدم نقض الوضوء بالنوم. This is a foundation that sleep does not break the wudu. And this is not this sleep that we're talking about, we're going to clarify what type of sleep we're referring to. This hadith is also evident of as-salatu fil jama'ah, that salah is to be prayed in congregation. وكذلك التقدم إلى صلاة الجماعة قبل الإقامة, that a person goes to the prayer before the iqamah, before the time of the iqamah. It's also evident of فضل الصحابة وطلبهم للأجر, the virtue of the Sahaba and their efforts in seeking reward. Also from the benefits of this hadith, الانتظار في الصلاة ليجتمع الناس, يجتمع الناس, waiting for the salah, for the people to congregate together. Now the type of sleep that we're talking about, النوم اليسير لا ينقض الوضوء. Light sleep does not break the wudu. وهذا يخالف الحديث صفوان العساد, the hadith that we mentioned before about the cocks. And he mentioned, as long as ولكن من غائط وبول ونوم, from feces and urine and sleep. This is talking about the purification of wiping over the socks. These are the minor impurities that are not from major impurities such as janaba. That's why they say the scholars differ regarding this, whether sleep breaks your wudu. In this book I have it mentions there's 8 opinions, but another book I've had before, I read before, that there may be 40 different opinions. There was many difference of opinions, regarding breaking wudu. However, he mentions ahammuha, the most important of all of these opinions is two. And is الفرق بين اليسير وهو الخفيف والكثير وهو الثقيل المستغرق. One, the difference between a light sleep and a deep sleep. The second difference الفرق بين النوم القاعد المتمكن وغيره كالمضطجع والمستلقي. The second, the difference in a person who is sleeping sitting upright and one who is not, i.e. lying back, lying down and lying back. As for the hadith of Anas bin Malik, then it affirms the first opinion of light sleep not breaking the wudu. As for the second opinion, then is based upon ghalabatul dhann, that a person may do something in their sleep that breaks their wudu. Not that sleep in and of itself breaks the wudu. That's an important point to know the difference. Sleep itself is not what breaks the wudu. It's the high chance of doing something in your sleep, passing wind in your sleep and the likes, that will break your wudu. It's also evident of وجوب الوضوء للصلاة وهذا من علم الضروريات. The obligation of wudu for the salah, and this is from matters that have been known by necessity. A person is not excused for ignorance. The last point mentioned of this hadith أنما وقع في أهده صلى الله عليه وسلم ولم ينهى عنه أو ولم ينهى عنه دل ذلك على جوازه. Whatever was done during the time of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم and he never prohibited it shows that it is permissible. An example of this is hadith in both Bukhari and Muslim. جابر رضي الله عنه كنا نعزل على أهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فبغى ذلك نبي الله فلم ينهنا. He mentions during the time of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, during intercourse we would pull out before ejaculation and we was never prohibited from that. So it shows the permissibility of doing so, and some would use that as evidence for the possibility of contraception. So things that happened during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and were not prohibited shows that it's permissible up until this day. The next hadith mentions وعن عائشة رضي عنها قالت جاءت فاطمة بنت بحبيش رضي الله عنهما إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالت يا رسول الله إني امرأة أستحاض فلا أطهر أفأدع الصلاة. So she mentioned, I am a woman whose blood keeps flowing even after menstruation. I am never purified. Should I therefore abandon the prayer, the salah? قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا إنما ذلك عرق وليس بحيض فإذا أقبلت حيدتك فدع الصلاة وإذا أدبرت فاغسلي عنك الدم ثم صلي. متفق عليه. وللبخاري ثم توضئي لكل صلاة. وأشار مسلم إلى أنه حدثها عمدا. So I mentioned here, he said to her, no, indeed that is only blood that comes from a vein, and it's not the menstrual bleeding. As for when your time comes that you know, your normal time of your menses that you know, when that time comes, then you leave the salah. When that time ends, then you make ghusl and you wash the blood and you pray. I.e., you would wash, you would wash the blood, i.e., you would make ghusl, and then you would pray as normal. In Bukhari, it mentions make wudu for each salah. Make wudu for each salah. This hadith is a foundation to show that istihada occurred during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where they'll have the continuous bleeding. And of the things that's mentioned, there was about 10 women at his time that were afflicted with this. And that was Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh, wa Zainab, wa Habiba, wa Himna, banatu Jahshin. Radiyallahu anhunna. And of the thing that's important for a person to understand these matters, the woman has to know her normal cycle. When she would normally have her cycle, to know the difference between the blood of menstruating bleeding and the blood that is istihada, that is just from the vein that continues to happen outside of that period. And of the differences is الحيض يمنع من الصلاة وأما الاستحاضة لا تمنع من الصلاة. The menstrual bleeding, you can't pray, but as for the other bleeding, it does not prevent you from prayer. You have to pray. Also, of the things that's mentioned, the bleeding from the womb is called haid. The one that's from the menstrual bleeding is the one that's from the womb. As for the other one, and this is from a vein. So as for the menstrual bleeding, this is something that is a natural process that happens for women in the way they've been created. As for the other bleeding, and it shows that there is some form of defect. Something's occurred like this that has caused this bleeding. Not from a natural reason. There may be some form of imbalance in hormone or injury or something like this. This hadith also shows that the menstrual bleeding is najis, is from impurities, and the obligation of purifying yourself from the najasat lis-salah. As for the obligation of ghusl for al-hayd, for menses, is not from this hadith, it's from other than this hadith. Also, the reason why this hadith was narrated in Nawaqid al-Wudu, the nullifiers of wudu, because they say the wujub, the obligation of making wudu for each salah. As for the obligation of making wudu for each salah, this is not something that is agreed upon. Rather, the madhab of the Malikiya differ in this. And it's based on the additional part of the wording of the hadith of ثُمَّ تَوَضَّئِ لِكُلِّ صَلَاةٍ, to perform wudu for every salah. Some say that this is mawquf, it goes back to the Sahabi and not to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that was a difference between Bukhari and Muslim also. Muslim does not see it to be uh, an obligation or from that which was narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rather, you see that it goes back to the Sahabi, the statement of the Sahabi. This also shows the virtue of the women of the Sahaba, the female companions, and the fact they will ask questions about that which they found difficulties in matters of the religion, and that there's no shyness in that. And that's why in a hadith as in both Bukhari and Muslim mentioned, قالت عائشة عنها نعم النساء نساء الأنصار لم يكن يمنعهن الحياء أن يتفقهن في الدين. Blessed are the women of the Ansar, who did not allow shyness to prevent them from becoming people of knowledge, people who had knowledge of their religion, because they would ask questions and not be shy to ask questions that would grant them understanding. Also, I mentioned this is evidence that the voice of the woman is not awrah. And mention things that one may be shy about when there is a need to do so. Things that one is shy about or things that may disgust a person because there is a need. The next hadith it mentions عن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه قال كنت رجلا مذاء فأمرت المقداد أن يسأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فسأله فقال فيه الوضوء متفق عليه واللفظ للبخاري. He mentioned, Ali ibn Talib mentioned, I was someone who was madhad. Or madha'an, sorry, madha'an, a person. So quick question, someone asked, you mentioned women is not, her voice is not awrah. Can she give nasiha online? No, she can't. Sheikh Fawzan mentioned this in detail. It's not for her to do that. No. And even Aisha Anha, she didn't publicly go out there and just teach people. They would come to her and ask her from al-hijab, and she would give them benefit and teach them. So no, they shouldn't. But if it's among women only, la bats, no problem. So he mentions that he was someone who had madhi. He had a lot of madhi, which is a discharge from the private area, usually due to touching or thinking about something of desire and that. So he mentioned he asked this person Miqdad to ask the Prophet ﷺ. He was shy to ask the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ directly because he was from the in-laws. He was the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Not that he was shy to know, but he was shy to approach with such a question. Being the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, married to his daughter, that he was someone who had this fluid that would come from desire abundantly. What would he do? So he mentioned, Prophet ﷺ said to him, he should perform wudu. He should perform wudu. So he mentions wujub al-wudu min khuruj al-madhi. When this fluid comes out of a person, you have to make wudu. It doesn't necessitate ghusl. Rather, ghusl comes from ejaculation. Either whilst awake or in a wet dream. Also, the thing that's mentioned, based on other hadith that are authentic, that one who has this, al-madhi, then they are to wash their private part and then perform wudu. Of the things it mentions of washing the private part, in another mention they have their private part as well as their testicles. And then they perform wudu. And it also is mentioned that it's not sufficient just to wipe with tissue, you have to wash it with water. It also shows that al-madhi is from the najasat al-mukhaffafa, from the light impurities. It's not a significant impurity, but it's an impurity that does break the wudu. Now, also it shows the permissibility of a person telling someone else about something that they experience that they may be shy of, because there's a need to do so. And also the permissibility of getting someone else to ask on your behalf if there was a need to do so. As we mentioned in this hadith, the need was that Ali anhu is the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was shy due to him being married to his daughter. We'll stop here today, inshallah ta'ala, and we'll continue bi'idhnillah ta'ala from the next inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. Any questions on what we've covered so far? No. So I can't hear you.
The sisters that will finish like their period and they're now going on menopause, how can they track when they have like odd cycles to know, like how do they navigate?
So I messaged in the group earlier, any questions towards that, to direct it to the sisters who are known to be teachers. Only because me myself, I'm not versed in matters to do with the women, and there are some sisters who are learnt, it's better to ask from them because it needs experience as well. Okay. Any other questions? Regarding the Sufis, does it mean they don't believe in the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? I didn't say that, but they have many issues. They have many issues. Now, they go into extreme with the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They believe that he's here with them in their masjid. They leave a chair that they think he comes and sits down in that chair and the likes. They have many deviances, acts of kufr and shirk, so, nah. May Allah guide them. We'll stop here, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum wa salli wa sallam ala nabiyyina wa habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakum khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.